The coldest nights in the Ozark Mountains had a way of making the world feel like it had shrunk down to just one person and everything trying to kill them. Nora Ashford preferred it that way. She had chosen the cabin for that exact reason, 12 miles up a gravel road that turned to mud in the rain and ice in the winter, far enough from the nearest town that nobody came unless they meant to, and nobody meant to. The sign at the bottom of the road didn't say no trespassing. It didn't say anything at all. Just a rusted mailbox she never checked and a cattle gate she kept padlocked from the inside. The message was the same either way. Don't. Ghost had learned the property lines better than she had. The Belgian Malinois moved through the tree line each morning like smoke through branches, nose working the cold air, ears rotating independent of each other, tracking sounds Nora couldn't hear from inside the cabin. He was 3 years old, and he carried himself like something much older. Careful, deliberate, always watching the ridge that overlooked the south side of the property, with an attention that went past habit and settled somewhere close to duty. He had been Sergeant First Class Daniel Ashford's dog before he was hers. Danny had brought Ghost home on 2 occasions. Once on leave after their second deployment, when Ghost was still in training, and Danny couldn't stop laughing at the way the pup had destroyed an entire couch in 40 minutes, and once in a photograph, a blurry cell phone image taken somewhere in a country Nora still couldn't say the name of without her chest tightening. In the photo, Danny was crouched in the dirt with Ghost's face pressed against his jaw, and Danny was grinning the way he only grinned when he thought nobody important was watching. That photograph was the only thing hanging on the wall of the cabin. Nora had been a combat nurse attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment for 4 years. She had come home from her last deployment 11 months ago and had not stopped moving for the first 3 of them, driving from city to city, staying in motels, eating at diners, filling a journal she never read back. Then she had driven to this cabin, which she had never seen before but had found through a listing so sparse it felt like a dare. Remote Ozark property, no utilities, seasonal road, cash only, and she had stopped moving. Ghost had been waiting at the rescue facility in Fayetteville, retired from service 6 weeks before she arrived. The coordinator had warned her. He's been through a lot. He doesn't warm up easily. He bit the last volunteer who tried to leash him. Nora had sat down on the concrete floor of the kennel run and said nothing, just waited. And after 18 minutes, Ghost had walked over and put his head in her lap without ceremony or drama, like he had already made his decision and was simply informing her of it. She understood that. Life in the cabin had its rhythms. Up before dawn, check the perimeter with Ghost, split firewood until her shoulders ached, eat something, sleep. She drove into town, a place called Hollerin Creek. Population maybe 800, once every 10 days for supplies. She spoke to the woman at the hardware store because she had to, and to the man who ran the gas station because he was hard to avoid, and to no one else. She paid cash. She did not give her name. She was aware that she was probably known in Hollerin Creek the way strangers always are in small towns, not by name but by description, by habit, by what she didn't say, but that was fine. That was the most she could manage. The thing about treating wounds in a combat zone was that you got very fast at triage. You got very fast at knowing what was salvageable and what wasn't, at making decisions in seconds that other people spent their whole lives trying to avoid. She had been good at it. She had been excellent at it. She had held men together with her hands, literally, while the world around her was loud and wrong and on fire, and she had not hesitated. She had hesitated once. She had hesitated for maybe 4 seconds, and Danny had died, and she had told herself every day, since that 4 seconds didn't matter, that the outcome would have been the same, that the injury was unsurvivable from the moment the RPG hit, and she had the documentation and 2 separate army surgeons who agreed with her. And none of that touched the 4 seconds. Nothing touched the 4 seconds. Ghost knew when the nights were bad. He would leave his position by the door and cross the cabin floor and put his weight against her legs, not asking to be petted, not looking at her, just there. 115 feet of lean muscle pressed against her shins, warm and present and immovable. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was February when the ice storm came. The forecast had said possible, which in the Ozarks in February meant certain, and Nora had spent 2 days bringing in extra wood, checking the propane, making sure the hand pump on the well was clear. She was not concerned. She had spent winters in worse places with far less. She watched the sleet begin around 3 in the afternoon and ate soup, and read a manual about cold weather horse management that she had found in a box of the previous owner's things, and Ghost slept in his usual spot with his nose tucked under his tail. The sound that woke her at 2 in the morning was not ice. Ghost was already at the window, hackles up, a low sound moving in his chest that she had heard exactly twice before. Once at a checkpoint in a country far away, and once when a black bear had wandered within 20 yards of the cabin the previous autumn. Not alarm. Warning. The difference mattered. She pulled on boots without lacing them and picked up the flashlight and the .357 from the shelf by the door and opened it 2 inches. The figure at the bottom of her porch steps was maybe 30 feet away, caught in the beam of the flashlight like something arrested mid-fall. A man, older, heavyset, dressed in jeans and a canvas coat that was completely inadequate for the night's temperature. He was holding the porch railing with both hands. His head was down. "Get off my property," she said. The man's head came up. His face was grey, not pale, grey, the particular color that Nora knew from triage, the color that meant the body had started making certain decisions without consulting the person attached to it. He started, and then his knees went. She was down the steps before she'd decided to move. His name was Earl Braddock, and he was 67 years old. And he had been walking for approximately 3 hours in the ice storm after his truck slid off the logging road 4 miles to the east. She learned the first 2 facts from the wallet in his coat pocket after she got him through the door. She learned the third from the state of his boots, which were soaked through, and the way he could not stop shaking even after she had him on the cot near the wood stove, with every blanket she owned piled on top of him. Ghost was not happy about this. He had stationed himself between the cot and the kitchen, which was where Nora was moving back and forth gathering supplies. Wool socks, the medical kit, the thermos of water she'd set on the stove to heat. Every time she crossed the invisible line he had drawn, he tracked her with his eyes, and the sound in his chest grew slightly louder. "Quiet," she told him. He did not go quiet. He shifted the sound into a slightly different register, which was Ghost's way of saying, "I am noting my objection for the record." She was checking Earl Braddock's fingers for frostbite. The tips were waxy and pale but not gone when he grabbed her wrist. Ghost crossed the room in 1 second. Not quite contact. His teeth were 6 inches from Earl Braddock's forearm, and he was absolutely still. And the sound in his chest had stopped entirely, which was somehow worse. "Ghost," Nora said. The dog did not move. "Ghost, down." A 3-second pause that felt considerably longer. Then Ghost took 1 step backward and sat, rigid, eyes fixed on Earl Braddock's hand on Nora's wrist with an attention that was almost scientific. Earl Braddock let go. "Sorry," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Your hands are warm." She looked at him for a moment. He was looking at her the way lost people looked at other people, a little desperate, a little ashamed of the desperation. "That's what warm hands are for," she said, and went back to his fingers. She worked through the night. Mild frostbite on 3 toes of his right foot, early hypothermia, dehydration. She had seen and treated all of it. She got fluids into him, warm and slow, and changed his socks and wrapped his feet, and sat in the chair across from the cot, and waited for his color to come back. Ghost sat between them the entire time, watching. By 4 in the morning, Earl Braddock was well enough to be embarrassed. He looked around the cabin, the bare walls, except for the photograph, the military neat arrangement of everything. Ghost, still watching him from his position like a very focused piece of furniture, and said, "You a vet?" "I was a nurse," Nora said. He looked at the photograph on the wall. She knew what he was seeing: a soldier, a dog, a country that was too dusty and too bright. "Who's that?" "My husband," she said. It was the first time she had said it to another person since the memorial service. Earl Braddock was quiet for a while. Outside, the sleet had stopped. She could hear the ice settling on the branches. "I'm sorry," he said. "Go to sleep, Mr. Braddock," she said. He did. Earl Braddock's daughter came the next morning. Nora heard the truck before she saw it. Chains on the tires, moving carefully up the gravel road she had assumed was impassable. Ghost was at the window before the truck stopped, and his whole body was different from how it had been with Earl. No raised hackles, no warning sound, just alertness, which was his version of neutral. The woman who got out of the truck was maybe 40, dark-haired, wearing a proper coat and real boots, and the expression of someone who had spent the last 6 hours very frightened. She stopped when she saw Nora in the doorway. "I'm looking for my father," she said. "Earl Braddock. His phone has been going straight to voicemail since midnight, and his truck. Someone off the highway found his truck off the logging road, and I've been—" "He's inside," Nora said. "He's okay." The woman, she introduced herself as Janet Braddock Hale, said it all in one word, the way people did when they'd been hyphenating for so long it had become one name, sat with her father for 40 minutes, while Nora made coffee and stayed out of the way. She could hear them through the cabin walls, the low hum of conversation, occasional laughter that surprised her. When Janet came back to the kitchen, she had been crying and was done with it. She had that look women got when they'd had the cry they needed and were now back to handling things. "He says you saved his life," Janet said. "He was walking in the right direction," Nora said. "He would have hit the county road another mile or two down. Maybe. He says the dog nearly took his arm off. Ghost is protective." Janet looked across the cabin at Ghost, who was sitting near the cot where her father was resting with his feet elevated. "Ghost," she repeated. "That's a good name for a dog that looks like that. He earned it." Janet turned back to Nora. She had the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. "You were military, nurse, combat, deployment." "My husband was Army," Janet said. Then, "He's gone." The two of them stood in the kitchen for a moment with that between them, not silence exactly, something more specific, the particular quiet of two people who have both been handed the same thing and are still figuring out what to do with it. 12 years ago, Janet said. "You get to where it doesn't knock you down anymore. It just—" She moved her hand in a small wave, like something cresting and passing. "It changes shape." Nora said nothing, who had on the edge of Earl Braddock's cot in a gesture she'd never seen from him before. "He was a K9 handler," Nora heard herself say. "My husband. Ghost was his dog." She hadn't planned to say it. It was just there, and then it was out. Janet Braddock Hale looked at Nora for a long time. "Then Ghost knows," she said simply. They got Earl into Janet's truck at noon. The sun had come out and was cutting through the ice on the branches, dropping it in sudden crashes that made Ghost startle sideways, which he would have been humiliated by if he had any capacity for humiliation. Earl shook Nora's hand at the truck door, both hands, his grip stronger than it had been at 2 in the morning. "I'm going to send someone up to fix your road," he said. "The rut's near the second turn. They'll flood you out in spring. Mr. Braddock, you don't have to." "I'm going to," he said. It was not a negotiation. She watched the truck make its way back down the mountain and stood in the cold for a while after the sound of the engine faded. Ghost pressed against her leg. She thought about Janet's words. It changes shape. She turned them over in her head, the way she turned things over when she was trying to understand them. Not looking for comfort in them, exactly, just looking at them squarely. The ice came back 2 weeks later, and a week after that, and then March came in muddy and cold, and everything that had frozen began the slow work of thawing out. Nora started driving into Hollerin Creek more often than she needed to. She told herself it was the road conditions. It was smart to check the road after any hard freeze, but she knew that wasn't the whole truth of it. She started talking to the woman at the hardware store. Her name was Beverly, and she had a son who had done 2 tours in Iraq and a way of listening that didn't require Nora to finish sentences if she didn't want to. She started talking to the man at the gas station. His name was Carl Feeney, and he had opinions about everything, and kept a photograph of his grandchildren behind the register, and always asked if Ghost was warm enough, which Ghost clearly was. She wasn't making friends. She wasn't sure she remembered how, but she was letting people know she existed, which felt like a start. April was when the letter arrived. She checked the mailbox that morning for the first time in 3 weeks. Earl's people had indeed fixed the ruts on her road, and the fixed road made her feel obscurely obligated to maintain the mailbox. And there was one envelope inside, forwarded 3 times, with an army address in the upper left corner, and a seal she recognized. Ghost sat at her feet while she read it in the cold morning air, and by the time she finished reading it, the letter was not about Danny, it was about Ghost. Specifically, it was from the K-9 program's administrative office, following up on her adoption paperwork from the previous spring. There was a form she hadn't completed. Routine, the letter said. Just a formality, but the form asked for the name of the handler to whom the animal had originally been assigned and the nature of the handler's separation from service. Name: Daniel Ashford, Sergeant First Class. Nature of separation: killed in action. She had known all of this. She had known all of this before she drove to Fayetteville, before she sat down on that kennel floor. She had known it and chosen it. Chosen Ghost specifically because of it. Or maybe chosen Ghost because Ghost had already chosen her, and they both already knew what they were carrying. But seeing it in official language, in a government form with boxes and a seal, made it different, made it harder to file away. She sat down on the porch steps with the letter in her hands, and Ghost climbed up beside her, which he was not supposed to do because the steps were narrow, and he took up most of them, and he pushed his face against her shoulder and held it there. She did not cry. She hadn't cried since the memorial service, and she wasn't ready to yet, but something moved in her chest, something that had been held very still for a very long time, and she let it move. "Okay," she said, to Ghost, or to Danny, or to herself, maybe all 3. She drove into Hollerin Creek that afternoon and asked Beverly at the hardware store if she knew of a good vet in the area. Beverly said there was a Dr. Whitmore in Jasper, 40 minutes, wonderful with working dogs, had a son who'd done the K-9 certification course in Tulsa. She called and made an appointment, not because Ghost was sick, he wasn't, but because she realized she had been putting it off for 11 months out of some feeling she couldn't quite name. A fear that taking Ghost to a vet would make his life officially her responsibility, that taking care of him officially would mean committing to something beyond the next 10 days. She was done with 10-day thinking. Dr. Marcus Whitmore was 60-something and methodical, with big hands that moved over Ghost with practiced care. Ghost accepted the examination with his usual dignity, standing still, neither welcoming nor objecting, his yellow eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance. "Former military animal," Dr. Whitmore said, not quite a question. "Yes, they're different, carry themselves different." He checked Ghost's hip joints, ran his hands along the spine. "He's in excellent condition for his age. Some scarring on the left flank, old injury. He favor that side at all?" "Cold mornings," Nora said. "We can manage that. Keep him moving, warm up slow." Dr. Whitmore straightened and looked at Nora over his glasses. "You look like you've both been doing the hard part of this already." "The hard part being staying alive," he said simply. "Some animals, some people, after certain things, that's the whole project for a while. Just surviving the day." He pulled Ghost's paperwork from the folder. "Looks like you're both doing more than surviving, though. Dog's well-fed, well-exercised. Coat's good. He trusts you." He tolerates me, Nora said. Dr. Whitmore smiled. With that kind of dog, same thing. She was in the parking lot getting Ghost settled in the truck when she heard it. A woman's voice, somewhere behind her, talking to someone on a phone, and she couldn't have explained later, not precisely, why that particular voice at that particular moment stopped her. Maybe it was the cadence. Maybe it was a word she caught. One word, not a significant word, not a password or a name or a code. Just a word the woman used to describe a dog in a story she was telling, a term Nora recognized from training, from briefings, from a particular set of documents that had been generated about Ghost when he was still assigned to the 75th. She turned. The woman was about her own age, maybe 30, standing near a sedan with a carrier in the back. She was telling someone on the phone about her cat. Nora could see the carrier, hear the cat's intermittent protest, and the word she'd used was a handler's term, obscure enough that civilians didn't use it, specific enough that it placed her immediately and without question. Ghost had turned too. He was looking at the woman with an expression Nora had never seen from him, something between recognition and confusion, like a sound heard from too far away. Nora crossed the parking lot. "Excuse me," she said. The woman looked up, phone still to her ear, wary in the way that women were wary of strangers in parking lots. "I'm sorry. I heard you use the word." She said it, the term, and watched the woman's face change. "I'm Nora Ashford. My husband was Danny Ashford." The woman went very still. "He was SFC Ashford," Nora said. "First deployment, 75th. He had a dog assigned to him, a Belgian Malinois call sign. Ghost," the woman said. Her name was Priya Kettner. She had been a veterinary technician attached to the same unit for Danny's first deployment, before she transitioned out. She had processed Ghost's initial training records. She had known Danny the way everyone who knew Danny knew him, briefly, vividly, the way people were known when they came through your life in a high-volume environment and left a disproportionate impression. He was... Priya started and stopped. He was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name, she finally said. Not like a skill. Like he actually cared. "Yeah," Nora said. "He did." Ghost stood between them, his tail moving in slow sweeps. Not the frantic wagging of a dog who'd found something joyful, but the steady, deliberate movement of a dog who had recognized something he had been looking for without knowing he was looking. They sat in the parking lot for an hour, Nora's truck and Priya's sedans, angled toward each other like been parked that way on purpose. The cat in the carrier went quiet eventually. Ghost lay between them on the asphalt with his head on his paws, and for the first time since Nora had known him, he looked entirely at rest. Priya talked about the deployment, about a specific morning on the range when Ghost had found a training aid buried 6 feet deep and sat down over it with such absolute certainty that the trainers had dug it up on his say-so alone, and Danny had laughed so hard he'd had to walk away. Nora listened. She had not had anyone to listen to who actually knew him, who had stories she hadn't heard, who could give her new pictures of him to add to the few she kept. She had been running on the same photographs, the same memories, the same 4 seconds for 11 months. She was so hungry for it, she didn't realize she was crying until she felt Ghost's head push up under her hand. "I'm sorry," Priya said. "Don't be," Nora said. She meant it. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and breathed out. "I'm not. I needed this. I didn't know how much." Priya leaned over and scratched at Ghost's ears, and Ghost turned his head to accept it, slowly, deliberately, with the air of an animal doing someone a significant favor, and then went back to watching the parking lot. "He's taking good care of you," Priya said. "We take care of each other," Nora said. She drove home in the late afternoon light, the Ozarks going gold on either side of the county road, Ghost in his spot with his head out the window, despite the cold, nose reading the air. She took the turn up her mountain road and felt the truck settle into the familiar ruts. Newly packed, compliments of Earl Braddock's road-fixing crew, and climbed toward the tree line. She thought about Janet Braddock Hale's words again. It changes shape. She thought about Danny in the photograph on the wall, his face pressed against Ghost's jaw, grinning. She thought about Ghost on the kennel floor, making his decision and informing her of it. She thought about 4 seconds, and how 4 seconds would probably always live somewhere in her. Not gone, not fixed, but not in charge of everything anymore. She thought about a parking lot in Jasper, Arkansas, and a woman who said one word that sounded like something small, but landed like a door opening. The cabin came into view around the last bend, the wood stove sending a thread of smoke straight up into the cold, clear sky. Ghost pulled his head back inside and turned to look at her in the way he sometimes did, direct, unapologetic, as if checking to make sure she was still there. She was. She cut the engine in the yard and sat for a moment before getting out. The light on the mountains was the kind that made everything look permanent. "Come on," she said. Ghost jumped down and walked ahead of her to the porch, waited while she unlocked the door and went inside. She followed him in,